"Welcome, the Lord's chosen." They expected you in a casket, not in the courtroom. That line alone should tell you everything about how deep this setup was. They didn't just want you gone, they wanted you forgotten, neatly crossed out on the record like a name that never existed. By now, they thought your story would have ended with a tragic headline, not a reappearance with divine receipts. But here's the irony. While they were busy planning your funeral, heaven was drafting your future. The same. People who preyed on your downfall are now forced to sit in attendance as you walk back into the very courtroom they swore you'd never reach alive. That's not coincidence. That's divine comedy. Because let's be honest, God has a sense of humor, and sometimes his punchlines are poetic justice written in legal ink. They called it a case. God called it a comeback. The date they marked for your downfall became the date stamped for their disappointment. It's funny how the same folders meant to. Contain your end now read like a testimony file. They expected silence from the grave. Instead, they're getting echoes from your resurrection. This isn't just another story about survival. This is about divine reversal. You were supposed to be the cautionary tale, but somehow you became the evidence that miracles look ordinary when they're real. The whole setup was designed to erase you, but what they didn't factor in was the one thing they couldn't manipulate, your endurance. So now, as this court date circles back, don't just see it as paperwork resurfacing. See it as prophecy revisiting. The same system that once plotted against you is about to validate you. And if that doesn't make heaven laugh, nothing will. Number one, they didn't expect survival. They expected a sealed file. When they counted you out, they didn't just assume you'd lose. They assumed you'd disappear. You weren't supposed to make it to this point. The plan wasn't built around your defense. It was built around your absence. They already pictured the paperwork being filed under deceased or case closed, neatly tying up a story they thought ended in your downfall. But what they didn't know was that God doesn't close a file he's still writing. Your survival ruined their script. They rehearsed how they'd speak about you in past tense, not realizing that your name would echo louder in the present. They had timelines, strategies, and signatures ready, expecting the news of your end to confirm their success. But every day you kept breathing was a reminder that the story wasn't finished. Your existence became the interruption that nobody planned for, the contradiction that shattered their confidence. They thought the battle would break you beyond repair. They thought stress, fear, and exhaustion would silence you before you ever reached this court date. Yet, here you are. Not perfect, not untouched, but undeniably alive. And that's what burns them the most. Your survival wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't part of the calculation. They didn't prepare for you to endure every blow and still stand tall enough to face what they thought would destroy you. The sealed file they imagined is still open, and now it tells a story they can't edit. Your name remains active in a system that assumed you'd be gone. The evidence they collected no longer points to your guilt, but to their misjudgment. Your very presence in that room, breathing and unbroken, is a divine contradiction to their expectation. They planned for your end, but God turned it into an extension. Clear's throat, what was supposed to be your expiration became your exhibition. You weren't buried, you were preserved. And now they have to sit in silence while the file they sealed in advance becomes the record of your survival. Number two, the courtroom wasn't scheduled for judgment, it was set for revelation. They thought the date on that court notice marked the day everything would finally end for you. They saw it as the moment where your silence would be used against you, where your name would be dragged through the system, and your story stamped with failure. But what they didn't understand was that heaven had already reserved that same day for something different, not judgment, but revelation. What they expected to expose you will, instead, expose them. God has a way of letting people walk into their own contradictions. They were confident because the evidence looked convincing, and the odds were stacked in their favor. They didn't realize the same delay they marked was divine preparation. Time wasn't protecting you from the court. Time was allowing the truth to mature. Every postponement, every adjournment, every waiting period wasn't random. It was rearranged by God so the hidden details could come to light when it mattered most. By the time you show up, the atmosphere will feel different. It's not because the system changed, but because the truth finally caught up. What they meant as a setup will read as a revelation. One that proves they weren't just wrong, they were exposed. The longer they tried to hold the lie together, the more fragile it became. Now, when the day arrives, it won't be about your defense. It will be about their exposure. The courtroom is no longer a place of defeat. It's a stage for unveiling. The same floor where they thought you'd be broken will witness their narrative crumble in real time. They came prepared for a conviction. They'll leave facing clarity. And that's the part they never expected. God didn't delay justice. He timed it. He let the date remain on the calendar so the truth could reveal itself in front of everyone who once doubted it. What they thought would end your story will end their illusion instead. Number 3, they built a case, but God built a counter. They spent months, maybe years, gathering everything they could to discredit you. Every mistake, every rumor, every misunderstood detail was collected like evidence in a trial that had already been decided in their minds. They weren't after justice. They were after justification. They wanted to prove they were right about you, even if it meant twisting facts and rewriting history. But what they didn't expect was that while they were busy building a case against you, God was quietly building a counter. He let them talk, gather, and assume. He allowed their confidence to grow just enough for their trap to be fully visible when it snapped back. Every accusation they wrote became a receipt in heaven's record, not of your guilt, but of their intent. They thought their logic was airtight, but they didn't account for divine timing. What they labeled as evidence was actually proof of their manipulation waiting to surface. They were so focused on exposing you that they exposed themselves. The details they exaggerated became the clues that revealed their deceit. The same words they weaponized will return as witnesses against them. And the most ironic part is that silence helped their undoing. While they were shouting, you were being refined. While they were building narratives, you were being built into the kind of person that truth naturally defends. God's counter wasn't loud. It was strategic. He didn't need to announce it because he knew the moment would come when the truth would stand on its own. And when it does, their case will collapse under the weight of its own lies. They built their argument to destroy you, but all they did was give God raw material to prove how protected you really were. What was meant to bury you will now testify for you. The case they created became the classroom where your vindication was written line by line, and this time, the final statement won't come from them. It'll come from the truth itself. Number 4, your survival became the evidence they didn't prepare for. Nothing unsettles those who plotted your end more than realizing you're still here. Your survival throws off everything they built, every story they told, every confident prediction they made about how your life would turn out. You were never supposed to make it past that season. You were supposed to be a memory by now, a story they'd tell with false sympathy but quiet satisfaction. Yet your continued existence exposes their lies without you even speaking. You're living proof that they were wrong. They had everything lined up perfectly, their explanations, their witnesses, their assumptions, but they didn't prepare for the one thing. They couldn't control you breathing through it all. They didn't plan for your strength to outlast their strategy. They thought the pressure would crush you, that the gossip would isolate you, that the stress would break your mind. Instead, you kept moving, kept enduring, and now your very presence has become the contradiction they can't explain. The system they trusted doesn't know what to do with a survivor like you. Your name was supposed to represent failure, but it became the evidence of grace. You're not just alive, you're functional, grounded, and sharper than before. You outlived their predictions, outgrew their opinions, and outlasted their lies. That's the part that stings them the most. They have to watch you live in the aftermath of what was designed to end you. Your survival isn't quiet. It speaks volumes. It testifies without a microphone. It humbles those who thought they held power over your outcome. Every breath you take now is a form of divine rebuttal. The case they built falls apart in real time because nothing they say can explain why you're still standing. You are the evidence they didn't prepare for, a walking contradiction, a living document of everything they swore couldn't happen. And the more you rise, the more their narrative collapses under the weight of your endurance. Number 5, they wanted closure, but God gave you continuation. They came ready for the final act, convinced your story would end neatly within their version of justice. Their goal wasn't just to win, it, Clear's throat, was to shut you down, to make sure no new chapters could ever be written about you. They rehearsed what they'd say, how they'd look, and how they'd celebrate once the judgment fell their way. To them, this was supposed to be closure, the end of your relevance, the silence of your name, the burial of your potential. But what they didn't realize was that God never signed off on their conclusion. What they called the end was only the midpoint in heaven's plan. While they were counting pages, God was writing volumes. They expected a period, he inserted a comma. Their plans were timed by calendars, but divine purpose doesn't follow human deadlines. The story they thought was over began to breathe again, not through your defense, but through God's continuation. They had no idea that when heaven decides your story isn't finished, even the gavel can't close the book. You were never meant to end where they expected you to. The very day they marked for your closure became the day your calling started unfolding. God turned what was supposed to be your finish line into your relaunch. They expected a verdict. Instead, they'll witness a resurrection. The more they try to conclude your story, the more evidence appears that you were never meant to be written off. Their closure depended on your silence, but your continuation depends on his promise. They can issue rulings, but they can't rewrite destiny. What they thought was over will soon prove to be an introduction to something far greater. You didn't lose. You simply outlived their timing. And now, the same people who came to watch your ending will have no choice but to witness your unfolding. Because God doesn't close stories that still have purpose left inside them. Number 6, they tried to bury you in paperwork, not knowing paper burns. They thought the system would do their dirty work for them. Instead of weapons, they used documents. Instead of confrontation, they used procedure. They piled reports, statements, signatures, and lies so high that no one was supposed to see you beneath it. Their goal wasn't truth. It was exhaustion. Clear as throat. They believed that if they buried you in enough paperwork, you'd drown in confusion or quit out of frustration. But what they didn't consider is that paper, no matter how official it looks, still burns when exposed to heat, and truth has always been fire. They tried to use policies and signatures as shackles, believing bureaucracy could silence destiny. Every file they wrote, every false statement they signed, every manipulated record they sent forward, all of it was designed to make you look guilty on paper. But what they didn't realize was that every document also left a trace of their intent. In trying to trap you, they recorded themselves. The same forms they filled to destroy your credibility now stand as written proof of their deceit. God didn't stop the paperwork. He let it accumulate so motives could be documented. He allowed them to get comfortable enough to create a trail they can't erase. And now that the fire of truth has been lit, every false report and every manipulated detail will turn to ashes in public view. The same evidence meant to bury you will become the foundation of their exposure. They thought they were building a case. They were actually building a confession. Every page now tells a different story, not of your downfall, but of their corruption. Their signatures became their own fingerprints, tying them to the lies they crafted. They tried to use ink to seal your fate, but they forgot that divine justice isn't intimidated by documents. Paper can't compete with fire. And God knows how to ignite what was meant to destroy you until it reveals everything that was hidden in plain sight. Number 7, you were never the defendant. You were the exhibit. They brought you into that room thinking you were the one on trial. They thought every eye would be on you, waiting to dissect your flaws, your choices, your past. They called you the defendant, but heaven had already rewritten your role long before the court date arrived. You were never meant to defend yourself. You were meant to be displayed. Your life itself became the exhibit that proves divine protection is real. They mistook your presence as weakness when it was actually proof of preservation. Every scar, every setback, every false accusation was meant to be held against you. Yet now, those same things stand as visual evidence of how God shielded you through the process. The irony is that the case they built to expose you has turned into a showcase of what grace looks like in real time. The very system that tried to label you guilty is now being forced to acknowledge that something greater was covering you the whole time. You didn't walk in to plead for mercy. You walked in carrying proof. The details of your endurance are the testimony they can't refute. You don't need to. argue because your survival already said everything that needed to be said. When God calls you his exhibit, he turns your pain into presentation. He lets the same people who doubted your strength watch you stand composed and unbroken, while everything they threw at you fails to leave a lasting mark. They thought they were putting you on display for humiliation, but God used it for demonstration. You're not the example of what went wrong. You're the evidence of what can't be destroyed. You became living proof that divine immunity isn't a myth. It's a reality that shows up when man's verdict meets God's will. They didn't realize it, but the entire room wasn't there to judge you. It was there to witness you. Number 8, the real trial wasn't legal, it was spiritual. What's unfolding in that courtroom isn't the real battle. It's only the visible replay of something that's already been settled in the unseen. The real verdict was decided long before anyone filed a case or printed a document. While people were preparing evidence and arguments, heaven had already stamped your outcome. This isn't just a legal fight, it's a spiritual confirmation. The papers, the hearings, the motions, they're all secondary to what's already been decreed over your life. The truth is, your opposition never had earthly power. They were just acting out a role in a script they didn't write. The real confrontation took place in the spiritual realm between truth and deception, between divine purpose and human manipulation. By the time this court date arrived, the result was already finished. What's happening now is just the physical manifestation of a spiritual victory that's been waiting to reveal itself. That's why everything they tried to use against you keeps turning back on them. The system they trusted is being forced to align with a higher order. They think it's their strategy working, but it's God rearranging the scene so the truth can surface naturally. What looks like coincidence is actually coordination. Every delay, every motion, every sudden shift in tone, none of it is random. Heaven has been syncing the timeline so that justice isn't just served, it's revealed. The courtroom is a stage, but the script belongs to God. And in his version, your name was cleared before the first accusation was ever written. You're not fighting to win. You're standing as proof that victory already exists. That's why peace follows you even in chaos. The verdict isn't pending, it's pronounced. What they're discovering now is what heaven has known all along. Your outcome was never in their hands. They're just now witnessing what God settled long before they decided to speak. Number 9. They didn't realize you became the judge's reminder of mercy. Your name carries more weight in that courtroom than anyone expected. To some, it's just another case file. But to others, it's a quiet reminder that justice isn't always black and white. Every time your name is read, the atmosphere shifts. It's not just because of what you've been through, but because your survival challenges the entire system's definition of fairness. You were supposed to be the cautionary tale, but instead, you've become the example that law can't fully explain. The evidence that mercy still overrides the mechanics of judgment. What they meant as humiliation has turned into revelation. You didn't come back into that room as a broken figure pleading for understanding. You came as a walking contradiction to their assumptions. Every person who once labeled you guilty now has to face the discomfort of seeing you restored. You're not just a defendant, you've become a mirror. You reflect to everyone involved what happens when grace meets truth in real time. Even those sitting in authority can feel it, a quiet tug reminding them that mercy is a form of justice too. Your story has a strange way of disarming arrogance. It exposes how limited human judgment really is. The same judge, expected to close your case quickly, now finds it lingering, not because of paperwork, but because something about you resists resolution. You represent everything law can't define: redemption, endurance, divine favor. You're proof that someone can be dragged through accusation after accusation and still come out intact. They didn't realize God positioned you there to shift the atmosphere, not just the outcome. Your name isn't a burden on the docket, it's a message. You remind the system that mercy still exists in places it was never supposed to. The very sight of you forces even those in power to acknowledge that grace outruns law, and that some verdicts are written by hands far greater than theirs. Number 10. They studied your fall, but ignored your foundation. They paid close attention to your collapse. They analyzed it, replayed it, and even celebrated it. They took notes on how you broke down, how you withdrew, how you stopped responding. To them, it looked like final proof. You were finished. But in their obsession with your fall, they never once stopped to ask what you were built on. They studied the wreckage, not the roots. They forgot that anything grounded in divine purpose can shake without shattering. Your silence confused them. They thought you were too weak to fight, too tired to care, or too lost to recover. What they didn't realize was that your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. You weren't retreating. You were rebuilding, while they were. Counting your mistakes, you were counting your lessons. While they were whispering about your ending, you were laying the foundation for your next beginning. They mistook your quietness for defeat because they couldn't understand the kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud. They only saw the surface of your story, the visible cracks and the public struggles. They never looked deep enough to see the structure holding you together. They didn't know your resilience wasn't emotional. It was spiritual. You weren't standing on reputation or luck. You were anchored in something they couldn't touch: conviction, purpose, and grace. That's why every attempt to bury you failed. You kept resurfacing because your base was unbreakable. Now, as things begin to turn around, they'll realize that your fall was never a failure. It was a test of construction. You were built differently, and time has proven it. The storm only exposed the parts that weren't needed. Everything essential stayed. Standing. They studied the fall to predict your end. But they never studied the foundation that guaranteed your return. What they thought was collapse was really calibration. The reset required to make sure your next rise is permanent. Number 11. They thought you'd break, not transform. Their plan was never just to destroy you, it was to dismantle your credibility. They didn't necessarily want you gone. They wanted you to crumble in public, to fall apart so dramatically that no one would ever take you seriously again. Their goal was humiliation disguised as justice. They wanted the kind of breakdown that makes people whisper, "I knew they wouldn't last." But what actually happened was something they couldn't predict. You didn't break down, you broke open. What shattered wasn't your spirit, it was their illusion of control. They expected your collapse to be loud, messy, and final. They were waiting for the version of you that would lash out or beg for sympathy. Instead, you went, quiet, disappeared for a while, and came back stronger, refined, focused, unrecognizable in the best way. The person they tried to break no longer exists, and that's what unsettles them the most. You're transformed right in the middle of what was supposed to destroy you. You didn't escape the fire. You evolved through it. They can't process how the same situation that was meant to ruin you ended up renewing you. You took everything meant for your destruction and used it as material for your reconstruction. You broke form, not faith. You let the pain dissolve the parts of you that were fragile, leaving behind only what was built to last. The breakdown they engineered became the doorway to your breakthrough. Now when they see you, they don't see the version they targeted. They see the aftermath of transformation. Clears throat. You're not responding the same, thinking the same, or walking the same. Their plan didn't just fail, it backfired. Because in trying to strip you of power, they accidentally pushed you into purpose. You became proof that breaking isn't the end. Sometimes it's the only way to reveal what was indestructible all along. Number 12. God. Let them get comfortable so their exposure would be complete. The waiting season wasn't punishment. It was preparation. What looked like God's silence was actually his surveillance. While you were praying for a quick resolution, he was watching them dig their own pit, making sure every detail of their deceit was recorded beyond denial. They thought your delay was proof that nothing was happening, that maybe they had gotten away with everything. But God was never late. He was gathering evidence. He let them speak freely, act boldly, and grow confident in their corruption, so that when the truth finally surfaced, there would be no way to twist it. They got comfortable in their lies because nothing seemed to stop them. The system appeared to protect them. The timing favored them, and you seemed forgotten. Clear's throat, but what they didn't see was that every word, every move, every manipulation was being documented, not by people, but by providence. The longer God waited, the clearer the picture became. He wasn't delaying your justice. He was perfecting it. If he had exposed them too soon, they could have argued their way out. But now, their own actions have become the proof. God let the story unfold until their confidence turned into confession. They got too comfortable, too careless, too loud, and in that arrogance, they revealed everything that needed to be seen. What you thought was wasted time was actually God setting up an airtight case. When He clears you, there will be no appeals, no doubts, and no lingering shadows, just permanent vindication. Your delay wasn't denial, it was divine precision. God wasn't ignoring your prayers. He was ensuring that when truth arrives, it does so completely. And when it happens, no one will question who was protected and who was pretending. They thought the waiting worked in their favor, but it was really the countdown to their exposure. Number 13, they tried to weaponize your name, but it became a warning instead. They thought destroying your name would be the easiest way to destroy your influence. They spread rumors, twisted facts, and used your silence as permission to narrate your story however they pleased. Your name became their favorite weapon, a tool to discredit you in rooms you hadn't even entered yet. They wanted it to sting when people heard it, to carry shame, not respect. What they didn't anticipate was that God would flip the narrative so completely that the same name they mocked would start to make them uncomfortable. Every rumor became a record of their jealousy. Every false accusation became an archive of their intent. The words they used to tear you down became the evidence that lifts you higher. God turned their gossip into prophecy. Without realizing it, they spoke the truth in reverse. When they said you'd never rise, they were unknowingly confirming that you would. When they said you were done, they were declaring that your comeback was already written. Now, your name doesn't represent defeat, it represents survival. They tried to make people fear being associated with you, but now your story makes people rethink how they treat the innocent. Your name shifted from scandal to symbol, a reminder that no lie lasts forever and that divine justice always comes full circle. The more they tried to bury your reputation, the more it grew roots. What they intended as defamation became documentation. Now, clears throat. When your name is mentioned, it carries a different weight. It doesn't trigger laughter. It triggers conviction. They can't bring you up without feeling exposed, because your name reminds them of what they did and how it failed. You became their warning label, the proof that touching the wrong person has consequences. They tried to make your name toxic. God made it timeless. No longer a rumor, but a revelation written in every whisper that was meant to erase you. Number 14. This was never about winning a case. It was about fulfilling a covenant. From the very beginning, this was bigger than paperwork, judges, or legal strategy. What you're walking through isn't just a case. It's a covenant playing out in real time. The court date wasn't randomly assigned, it was divinely scheduled. Heaven marked it long before the system printed it. You're not standing in that room because of what people did. You're standing there because God is about to reveal what He promised. What looked like opposition was actually orchestration. They thought this was about punishment, but God has been using it for positioning. Every delay, every setback, every sleepless night was part of a timeline that doesn't belong to them. The gavel they expected to condemn you will announce something they can't control. Your release into the next phase of your purpose. They wanted a sentence. God planned ascending. The same place designed to limit you is about to launch you. This isn't about legal victory. It's about spiritual fulfillment. You've been walking under a promise that couldn't be activated until pressure forced it into motion. What they thought was an ending became the exact moment heaven had been waiting for. The courtroom is only a vessel. The real transaction is happening in the unseen. The verdict won't define you. It'll reveal what was already decided. God's covenant with you isn't fragile. It's final. No ruling can overrule what He's written in your destiny. That's why the date on that notice feels different. Because it's not just a day of judgment, it's a day of unveiling. Everything that's happened has led to this moment, not for your downfall, but for your declaration. They prepared to witness your end. But what they'll actually see is your entrance, not into guilt or shame, but into the very promise that's been waiting for divine confirmation. This isn't about clearing your name. It's about confirming your calling. Conclusion. From the beginning, this was never about a courtroom. It was about a kingdom. Every accusation, every delay, every twisted narrative was a setup for a divine revelation. They thought this case was your end, but it was actually God's evidence, proof that purpose doesn't die under pressure. You weren't buried. You were being built. Every attempt to silence you became another chapter in your vindication story. They thought they had cornered you legally, but heaven had already cleared you spiritually. Your survival was never random. It was strategic. God didn't just keep you alive to prove them wrong. He kept you alive to prove himself right. The court date they expected to destroy you became a divine timestamp, the moment heaven's paperwork met the world's protocol. The same system that tried to convict you is now forced to confirm what God already decreed, that you were chosen long before they conspired. They brought you in as the defendant, but you stood there as the exhibit, living proof that divine protection still exists. And now, as the final chapter unfolds, their confusion will become your confirmation. The names that mocked you will watch you stand. The same voices that predicted your fall will have to narrate your rise. Because when God decides to flip the script, he doesn't need your permission, and he doesn't ask for theirs. He simply turns what was meant for destruction into undeniable demonstration. You were never on trial. The truth was, and now the truth has won. So as you walk into this next season, understand this. The verdict isn't just freedom, it's fulfillment. This wasn't about winning a case, it was about proving a covenant. You are the living testimony that grace outlasts law, that silence doesn't equal defeat, and that every setback was divine strategy in disguise. The case they built against you became the proof God built through you. If this message spoke to you, don't just keep it to yourself, share it. Someone else needs to hear what survival really looks like when God's involved. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more revelations, truth, and divine insight. And if this resonated deep in your spirit, share it with someone walking through their own trial. Because sometimes all they need is proof that resurrection can walk back into the courtroom and change the story completely. Stay blessed always.